to Soul Food Coffee House here in Redmond, Washington. And every month we take a look at the astrology for the month ahead. And as I say every month, God, is going to be another crazy and intense month. And yes, it is. We have a number of major things happening in March. And obviously, just looking at the world news and the national news and our own personal lives, you don't need me to tell you that it's crazy up there and down here. But before I jump into that, I would like to take a few minutes. I have a number of events coming up. I want to run through them really quickly. For those of you who are online and whine about having to listen to this, there's a fast forward button. Don't listen. Just go to the part where I start talking about the astrology of the month ahead. I want to remind everyone here and my viewers online that this and other online astrology work that I do is funded by Patreon, and patreon.com, that's Patreon, patreon.com/Rick Levine, and you can see a wide range of offerings, not only the free monthly that is recorded here tonight on the last Wednesday of every month, but also a short mid-month update that's usually about a half an hour long, and then relatively intermittent, not quite weekly cosmic quickies that run 10 minutes to 15 minutes or so that are on a variety of astrological topics, some newsworthy, some just astrology teachings, but not necessarily tied to where the planets are currently. And then there is also, I teach an online class of how to interpret birth charts or natal charts, how to do astrology. And all these are offered through patreon.com/Rick Levine. So that's first thing out of the way. And even if you're not into more, even throwing in $1 a month helps not only this process, but the editing process. And I would love to get a second camera and a camera person and a producer, and all these things will cost money. And over time, you guys can help make it happen. Otherwise, you put up with me the same old way because I do everything from start to finish. Okay. I have an exciting announcement actually tonight, and the announcement that just went online just a couple of days ago is that I will be joining forces. I will be working with the amazing and awesome Caroline Casey. Does people here know Caroline's work? Okay, Caroline is a phenomenon. And Caroline and I will be leading an 8-day retreat in Bali next November, and it will be called it is called Pragmatic Mysticism and Applied Divination, and it's astrology as a living guide to being ever better players on the team of creation. We're going to have fun. This is not just going to be a how-to do astrology. We are going to be we're going to be collaborating to use the astrological metaphors to create some magic. It's going to be an adventure. We're going to be kind of playing with the upcoming Pluto-Saturn conjunction that will be in January of 2020. This will just be a couple months prior to that. And we're going to use planetary role-playing and planetary incantation, astrodrama, a variety of rituals, and it's going to be fun. So online at heavenandearthworkshops.com, www.heavenandearthworkshops.com. They've been leading astrology and other cosmic workshops in Bali, India, Mexico, and England for probably 15 years now. This will be my I think it's probably my 9th or 10th event that I've done with Heaven and Earth workshops. And if you want more information, and we have a complete curriculum online, this event will fill up. And so if you're interested, let me know, let Evelyn Roberts, who is the proprietor at Heaven and Earth Workshops, let her know. It's going to be fun. It's going to be November 8th through the 16th, and that's coming up. Okay, just quickly, a couple of other things. I am leaving a week from today on March 6th, and I'm just going to mention these in a blur, because if you live in any of these places and are watching online, I will be lecturing on March 8th through the 10th at the 20th International Astrology Conference. That's the Balkan Astrology Conference, and that is in Belgrade, Serbia. And there are going to be astrologers there from the United States, Peru, Canada, Australia, Mexico, and Turkey. And so it's going to be quite a weekend, and if you live in that neck of the woods, feel free to follow the link on the bottom of the screen. The following weekend, I'll be lecturing at the conference that'll be the Astrology Day Conference in Istanbul, Turkey. And then the following weekend, on the March 15th, 16th, 17th, I will be lecturing at the second annual International Congress of Astrology in Lisbon, Portugal. The next thing that I want to mention is my summer workshop at Brighton Bush Hot Springs. That'll be July 28th through August 2nd. That's called Putting Astrology to Work in Your Life, Thinking Cosmically While Acting Locally. That event always, I do these, a winter and a summer event every year at Brighton Bush. And it's an amazing place, about 2 hours car ride out of Portland, Oregon, up in the mountains in the old growth forest. And it's an amazing place. Of all the places I've taught all around the world, it's like one of the coolest places. There's no telephone there. There's no internet. You're off the grid. 3 meals a day. There's nowhere to go, nothing to do. And this summer event, it's a 5-night event. And so we really dig into individual charts. We do a lot of experiential type stuff, again, relying on astrodrama techniques and doing planet walks and doing some movement stuff. And it's a lot of fun to work at ways to get astrology out of our heads and down into our bodies. Often, astrology is a study of the throat chakra and up. And so we forget that although we kind of want to learn about what's up there and what's out there, we want to reach for the stars, we want to become cosmic. I mean, I do. We forget that it's not only about ascension, which is spirit, which is upward, it's also about incarnation. It's about taking those cosmic energies and pulling them down into our lives, into our bodies, and that's the other half of the equation that sometimes we forget, and so we will be working with that. And I'll save the rest of the year, which includes Bali in November. But here we are, now, at the very end of February, with the month of March ahead of us, and I re-listened to some of my talk, which I occasionally do, and I said that February was going to go out like a lion. It's normally March that comes in like a lamb and goes out like a lion, or vice versa, or whatever. But we are on the precipice right now of an amazing transformation and change. And it's being heightened by a number of things. Normally, when I look at the month ahead and think about what it is we need to look at, what do we need to talk about, what do we need to think about, I normally start with what are the major outer planet, the slowest moving planets, what are they doing? What's the interactions between these planets that that may not create something that happens on a Thursday afternoon at 3 o'clock, but it creates a few weeks of energy that may actually be a deeper, longer lasting event. In medicine, we talk about the difference between an acute and a chronic illness. An acute is something that flares up and it can be very, very intense in the moment, but 3 days later it could be gone. Whereas something that's chronic may not be as dramatic, but it settles in and it stays with us and it doesn't go away and it builds up over time. The word chronic actually comes from the Greek word chronos, which is the Greek word for the Latin word Saturn. So Saturn is chronos, and it's that the seriousness of things that settle in time. So we have some things that happen in March that are acute, meaning that it's the beginning of spring. You know, it happens every year. And it's like a buzz few days when the sun moves from Pisces into Aries to begin the astrological year anew, and that occurs on March 20th. And we'll kind of, zoom into that a little bit. Every month we have a new moon and a full moon, and these are also like acute things. They happen very repetitively, but if you pay attention to them, a new moon or a full moon can be very powerful, and even if you're not paying attention to them, they can be triggers for some of the deeper, more powerful events going on. And in particular, we'll look at both the new moon on March 6th and the full moon on March 20th. They both have interesting stories, and we'll dig into those in a few minutes. But those are still acute events. We have a Mercury retrograde. This Mercury retrograde is interesting. We're already in the zone. We're already feeling it, because before Mercury turns retrograde, Mercury is moving through an area of the sky that then it retrogrades through and it revisits, and then it turns direct and it revisits it a third time. That area where Mercury goes through and backwards and then through again is called the shadow. And when Mercury is in that shadow period, even though it's still going direct as it is now, it's like things are already feeling a little retrograde-y. Is that a word, retrograde-y? It is now. They say that in the psychological book, of all the symptoms of various illnesses, that one of the symptoms of schizophrenia is something called creating neologisms. And a neologism is making up a word that's new. And I do it all the time. Don't tell anyone. So what's particularly unusual about this particular retrograde is that Mercury entered, let's see if I have the date here real handy. I think I do. Mercury, sometimes I just have too many pieces of paper. There it is. All right, Mercury entered Pisces back on February 10th. So normally when Mercury is just whizzing through the signs, Mercury moves about a degree. It moves about almost 2 degrees a day. So Mercury can whiz through a sign in 2 weeks. When it is going forward at direct motion fast, it takes about 2 weeks to go through one entire sign. However, this time, Mercury went into Pisces on February 20th, and it reaches 29 degrees of Pisces by March 5th. And on March 5th, it begins its retrograde at 29 degrees of Pisces, and it pulls all the way back to 16 degrees of Pisces, and it turns direct on March 28th. Now, this means two things. It means all of March is a retrograde Mercury month for all intents and purposes. And secondly, that entire Mercury retrograde period is within the sign of Pisces. Often the retrograde will cross a sign and revisit the sign before, but this one is all in Pisces. So the thing of interest is that this Mercury retrograde is contained within 1 month, and also contained within one sign. And I say this, I feel like I say this 3 times a year, and I've been doing this thing at this monthly forecast at Soul Food for about 10 years now. So I feel like I've said this before. It's like Yogi Berra said, deja vu all over again. Retrogrades get a bum rap, and they get a bum rap for a good reason that is wrong in our current world that we live in. And the reason is this. First of all, the planet doesn't move backwards. It's a perspective thing, and from Earth's point of view, it's like you got something holding still and you're moving. It looks against the background like it's actually moving. In fact, I use this analogy often. If you're in a train and there's a train on the other side of the valley against some mountains, and it's a freight train, and you're in a passenger train going faster than the freight train, you look out there and you can see that the freight train is going slower than you because you can see it against the mountains and you can see that you're passing it. Now, if over 20 or 30 miles, those two trains came closer and closer together until you're right on tracks right next to each other, and you don't have the mountains behind you anymore, you look out the window at that freight train and you could swear for a moment that that train is actually moving backwards because you're moving forward faster than it. We've all had this experience, whether it's in a subway in a city or even in a car where you're right next to another car and all of a sudden you start rolling forward, but it looks for a second like the car next to you is moving backwards. That's all a retrograde is that when a planet gets closer to Earth in its normal cycle, it turns retrograde because the perspective is such that it looks like we're going faster than it is, even if we're not. It's that weird perspective thing. But here's the thing to understand how retrogrades work. Mercury or any true planet. When I say true planet, because we astrologers include the sun and the moon as planets, because the Greek word planet just means something that wanders, a star that wanders in the sky. And by that definition, the sun and the moon are in fact planets, regardless of what astronomers tell us. But the true planets, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, and a couple of 100,000 other things that NASA tracks that go around the sun too. All these things in their normal orbit around the sun at times come closer to Earth and look like they're going against the backdrop of fixed stars backwards. The deal, though, is that when a planet is retrograde, whether it's Mercury that comes 3 times a year between the Earth and the sun. We're on the Earth going around the sun, and 3 times a year Mercury catches up to the Earth and comes between the Earth and the sun. That's when it turns retrograde, when it's closest to Earth. The same with Venus. But with Mars and the outer planets, they come closest to the Earth when they're on the same side of the sun as the Earth. But on Earth's point of view, it looks like those planets are opposite the sun, because they're on one side, they're further out away from the sun than we are, and the sun is on the other side. So Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, no, let me do that again. Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. The planets that are outer planets, further away from the sun than the Earth. When those planets are in opposition to the sun, they are always retrograde because they're closer to Earth. When the inner planets, Mercury and Venus, are on the same side of they're always on the same side as the sun because they're between the Earth and the sun. But when they come on our side of the sun, in between the Earth and the sun, they're closer, they look like they're going backwards. Now here's the key piece. When a planet is closer to the Earth than it is when it's farther away in its own individual rhythm, it's like a radio station that's closer to your radio or farther away. which one are you going to be able to tune in on your radio easier? Duh, the one that's closer. Now what this means is that when a planet is retrograde, its signal is louder than it is at other times. In our three-dimensional world, we live in a world where we have lots of room to move mentally, spiritually, psychically, emotionally. And so when a volume goes up on something, that part of our life becomes energized. But if you were living 500 years ago, or 1,000 years ago, or 2,000 years ago, when a lot of this astrology stuff came together, if you lived in a little village in Greece, and all of a sudden one planet, or maybe even in your birth chart, one planet that was retrograde was really, really loud. Let's say you were born with Mercury retrograde, so Mercury was really loud in your planet. And you were one of 7 children, and you were expected from the age that you could do anything, that you did your chores, you worked in the fields. If you were a boy, you learned whatever your dad's trade was. If he had a trade, you became a shoemaker or whatever. If you were a woman, you basically learned how to do household chores until you were sold. That's kind of really true, but we've come a long way and we haven't come very far all at once. That's a rabbit hole we could go down for a long time. But the point is that if you had a really active Mercury and you wanted to, you were thinking these incredible thoughts and you wanted to communicate them with people and you wanted to learn to read and maybe even learn to read Greek and Latin, or if you were in ancient Greece 2,000 years ago, well, yeah, Latin was already around, but the point was that you had nowhere to go with that because it was not part of your place that you were born in life. There was no such thing as become all you can be, and human growth potential, and all of that. These are all luxuries of our time and age. So if you were born with a very loud Venus, how cool was that? Well, not at all if everything that you saw you wanted to beautify and make in some way more beautiful, and you wanted to spend your time singing beautiful songs and kind of turning people on to the magic of the beauty of the universe. Forget it. There were potatoes to plant. So it's like this. If you're a hyperactive human being in this day and age, if your Mercury is all amped up natally, do you know how we treat it? We treat it medically with, like ADH or ADD or ADHD. Am I getting the letters right? Yeah. They change every decade. So if you're suffering from some sort of hyperactivity, what's given to you is a drug that is like an amphetamine-based or similar to an amphetamine type of drug that makes you even more hyperactive. And then you know what happens? Whoop, you shut down. That's what retrogrades are. That's how retrogrades work. It's the energy becomes so hyped up there's nowhere to go and it has to shut down. If you have a retrograde planet in your chart, let's say anyone here know they were born with a Mercury retrograde? Don't be shy. All right, so it's like your Mercury retrograde as a child, that may be part of your life where you were, every time you got into that Mercury and started expressing it, you were told, don't be like that. Go to your room if you're going to talk about that kind of crazy stuff, or whatever it is. And we all have our own stuff, but it's like, it's not part of the normal linear world we live in, and so it becomes too much for other people, so we learn how to shut it down. And the problem is that every planet in every chart just wants to be expressed. It just wants to be heard, it just wants to be seen, it just wants to be acknowledged in some way. And so if you have to shut down your intellect, then if it's not getting out, it becomes projected, and you meet it out there, and you meet it out there as problems, as things you don't like. And so this is the mechanism of why retrogrades can be so difficult. Now, the party line is that when Mercury is retrograde, don't travel. I'm leaving on a crazy man's tour. I mean, I'll be flying from Seattle to LA to Moscow to Belgrade to Istanbul to Istanbul to Lisbon and to Barcelona, then to Chicago, and then back to Seattle over 5 weeks, of which 3 of those weeks will be in a Mercury retrograde. I'll let you know how it goes. Yeah. The idea of that astrologers often will say, don't sign a contract while Mercury is retrograde. It's one of the stupidest things that any astrologer can say. I mean, look, Mercury is retrograde 3 times a year for about 3 weeks, so that's like 9 weeks. That's like for more than nearly a fifth of the year, Mercury is retrograde. I have a client who calls up and said, oh my God, my house has been on the market, for 2 months. Mercury turned retrograde yesterday. Someone gave me an offer, but I'm afraid to do it while Mercury is retrograde. Should I wait until it goes direct? Now, I just want to grab that person by the neck and go, I'm not a physically abusive person at all, but I want to smack them intellectually. It's like I've been looking for a house to buy for 3 years, and we came across one that looks perfect, but Mercury just turned retrograde. If we wait 3 weeks, it probably won't be there. Should we buy it? You don't need an astrologer. You need a 5-year-old kid, to tell you how to live. If it's a good deal, buy it. The problem, though, is, and there is something real here, the problem is that when the planets are retrograde, especially Mercury, because the energy is, it's like driving during rush hour. It's like, and you have to get somewhere, and you know that it takes you 20 minutes to get there, and so you allow 20 minutes, and you forget it's during rush hour, and 19 minutes into this, you're not very far, and you begin to panic. Maybe I should get off the freeway and go around the lake on the north end or whatever, and you basically freak out, and you make a decision, and it's a stupid decision. That's what happens when Mercury is retrograde. It's not don't sign a contract. It's read the damn thing and consult an attorney or your husband or wife or partner or someone. Don't just go, well, I've needed a house and this one looks okay, and then 3 days later you realize, I just bought a house without a bathroom. That probably wasn't a good idea. I should have looked. Or you go out looking for a car, and the first car you see is this amazing purple Porsche that is like, it's like your dream, like, you're 40 years old and you want to kind of make a, I'm a kid again statement, and so rather than, quitting your job and leaving your family, you buy this purple Porsche, and you come home all proud of yourself, and you go, oh my God, I have a wife and a dog, and 3 kids. What am I going to do? It's like so the thing with Mercury retrograde is not don't do anything. It's don't do anything sudden and impulsive without really thinking about what it is you're doing. Because chances are the sense of urgency isn't as great as it feels in that moment. Now, there's another piece of Mercury retrogrades, and that is that Mercury is covering territory that it already covered from Earth's point of view. And from that standpoint, it may be that over the last couple of weeks, we've been working on projects that when Mercury turns retrograde on March 5th, for the entire month of March, it might feel like we're not making the progress that we thought we were going to make. Or it might even be that we find ourselves having to redo stuff that we thought we'd already done. And then when Mercury turns direct on March 28th, even though we're beginning to move forward again, it'll take another 3 weeks before Mercury has moved through the territory that it already retrograded through. And so that may feel like you're making progress, but it may feel like you're making the progress that you thought you were going to make back in mid-February. So Mercury retrograde is a big piece of March. and it's a little bit more potent than just an acute, I'm in a lousy mood for an hour kind of a thing, because it is part of the backdrop of the month. But it's not the heavyweight of the month. What's the heavyweight of the month?
Mars.
Almost. Uranus. So the deal is that when I run the transits for a new month, and I look at them and I sort them in the order of days in which they happen, and that's kind of what I work off here as I work my way through the month. But then I also do a quick sort, and I sort them by planet, because I want to see what's Mars doing to Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. What's Jupiter, slower moving even, doing to Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune, and Pluto? What's Saturn doing to Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto? Each one is going to aspect the slower moving planets out further. When Uranus makes an aspect to planets further out than Uranus to Neptune or Pluto, like it squared Pluto through 2012 through 2015, that's chronic. That's something that may not make something happen on a Tuesday afternoon, but we'll forever look back at that 2012 to 2015 as kind of like a revisitation to the, sex, drugs, and rock and roll of the 1960s, where we had issues of drug reformation, drug law, reform, gender reform, environmental stuff, people in the streets around the world. I mean, these issues never went away, but they were and they weren't just about one issue, but it was that 3-year period, or more even, that was those outer planets, Uranus to Neptune. So, when I looked at March, the first thing I noticed when I sorted them by planets was that although there was a lot of activity through the month, that there was no activity beyond Mars. In other words, there were no aspects from Jupiter outward from one planet to another. And that tells me something very important, because it means the action is going to be where the acute stuff is. It's going to be what I have always called my version of the Lord's Prayer, the astrologer's prayer. It's give us this day our daily noise. It's that high frequency stuff that's going to be really active in March, except for the fact that Uranus, which is the first planet that was discovered outside of our ability to perceive things directly. Uranus is the first planet that was discovered by the use of technology, a telescope. And Uranus takes 84 years to make one journey around the sun through the zodiac. 84 years divided by 12 signs is 7. 7 times 12 is 84. Uranus spends 7 years in each sign. And because of its retrograde motion, that 7 years can actually be 8, because it tips in and back out and in and out, so to speak. But Uranus entered Aries on March 11th, 2011, on the day of the Fukushima tidal wave earthquake meltdown. That was the day that Uranus moved into Aries, the planet of impulsive expression of energy. Uranus being the lightning planet that releases energy. Uranus is sometimes called the Great Awakener. Uranus, because if it's the middle of the night and the lightning strikes, it's like, I got it. And for a moment you can see everything. And then even though it becomes dark again a split second later, you still know what was there. And that's how Uranus works. Uranus is that electric, turn the lights on, blink, I got it. Uranus is counter to all the other energies. Uranus, the North Pole faces the sun, and it rotates like a bowling ball, and the moons are all in the plane of the equator, and they all go retrograde. Uranus is the weird planet. It's everything about Uranus is weird. And as Uranus moves through the chart, it basically can be abrupt, it can be surprising, it can be unexpected, and it always releases tension where tension was buried. And even the Fukushima earthquake, it might not have been a good event. Well, it certainly was a horrific event for 250,000 people or more. But the fact is, from the Earth standpoint, it had gas and it burped. I feel better now. You know, it's like we look at things from our perspective. So Uranus has spent 7 years in Aries, where change has been rather instantaneous, because every time the lightning strikes, we respond, and Aries likes new things, and Uranus in Aries has really kind of been 7 years of rapid change on many things, both individually, personally, relationship-wise, career-wise, depending upon what planets you have where Uranus bumped up against your planets in your birth chart as it moved through the sign of Aries. Last May of 2018, Uranus just tipped from Aries into Taurus, and then it retrograded and went back into Aries, and on March 6th, the day after Mercury turns retrograde, Uranus moves from Aries into Taurus, where it will be the next 7 years. Now, because this is a chronic condition, meaning that this is going to be a background energy for 7 years, we don't have to talk about everything about Uranus in Taurus today, because we're going to have several years to talk about it and unfold it, and we'll watch as those things change Uranus suddenly, because as it moves through Taurus, it's going to impact those things which are Taurian. So the question is, what will Uranus in Taurus bring? Even though it might bring a flavor and a taste of it in the first few days, what will it bring to us over the next 7 years? So Uranus has moved into Taurus, or it will on March 6th. What is Taurus all about? Earth. Earth signs are down to earth. Earth signs are practical. They're sensible. They're sensual, and that's not sexual. Sometimes those two words get confused. Sex can certainly be sensual, but sensual does not have to be sexual, because sensual just means of the senses. And Taurus is the sign of the 5 senses. Do we have any Taurus suns in here? Taurus suns or moons? You're just hot. Okay. So I sometimes say to a Taurus, if you take care of the senses, everything else will take care of itself. In other words, it's a bit of an oversimplification, but Taurus likes that oversimplification because it's like it's what is. It's if I can taste it, smell it, touch it, it's real. And the Taurus is often the person who has, the 220 count sheets and the nice, towels and good food and a nice bottle of wine and good music, because all these things are sense oriented. And there's a security that Taurus likes because it wants to make sure that its senses will be fed. Taurus is a Venus related sign, and so it has to do with beauty, but it's not mental intellectual beauty as it is in Libra, because Libra is another Taurus sign that's an air sign, it's mental. In Taurus, it's about physical. It's about the practical physical side of aesthetic beauty or perfection. But it's also a fixed sign, and that means that Taurus does not move easily. I always think of Taurus as Newton's laws of motion. An object at rest tends to stay at rest unless acted on by an outside force. In other words, if your Taurus friend, lover, partner, or kid is on the couch watching TV, don't try to get them to go mow the lawn or go shopping or whatever, because the more you push them, the more they're going to settle into where they are. Now, on the other hand, if the Taurus is in motion, if they're doing something, if they're, working on a puzzle, if they're doing their homework, whatever it is they're doing, hey, can I interrupt you for a second? I need you. Forget it. Don't, because they're not going to stop, because Taurus is determined and plodding, and it may not be the fastest sign. Matter of fact, it's surrounded by Aries, which is so fast it's instantaneous, and Gemini, which is so fast it doesn't know where it's going everywhere at once. Taurus, in the middle, ain't going nowhere unless it knows where it's going, and it's gonna get there at its own rate. So what happens when lightning strikes? Taurus goes, it's lightning, I ain't gonna move for it, I ain't gonna catch on fire, I ain't gonna break up, in other words, Taurus, with Uranus in Aries, things reacted instantaneously, the change occurred very quickly. Uranus in Taurus is going to be a different flavor, because the brilliance of Taurus is holding on to the status quo. Uranus don't give a shit. Uranus is going to just say more lightning until the change occurs. Now, what I think this will mean is that over the next 7 years, there may not be as much change as often, both globally, culturally, politically, socially, economically, personally, emotional, there may not be as many changes as quick, but the changes that occur are going to be more significant. It's like an earthquake. It's better on one level to have lots of little earthquakes because they all release built-up tension. And if you don't move, if you just say, I'm going to stay on the couch, or my now traveling through the cosmos deceased astrology buddy partner Jeff Jower always used to say, when the going gets tough, the Taurus goes for the deli. It's like, give me a sec. Or when the going gets tough, the Taurus goes shopping. It wants to hold the status quo and do something that's familiar, that takes care of the senses. Uranus is going to break up what it needs to break up. And some of those things are going to be the most basic, the most fundamental, the most grounded things in our life. Taurus is an earth sign. It rules the farming, the crops, the food system. We will see some of that. Again, you probably don't need to be an astrologer to guess that these are issues that are going to be coming up. But in Aries, there were sudden changes and things happening and changes in awareness. In Taurus, expect very powerful, overwhelming shifts when it comes to the, factory food, organic, what do you eat, all these, dilemmas that are very basic. This is going to be part of the Uranus in Taurus. Taurus also is things of value. Expect Uranus and Taurus to create, to wreak some havoc in the financial universe. Now again, you don't need to be an astrologer to say that the financial system is on the verge of something that's collapse or whatever. The fact is that I have astrologer friends who have been saying that we are on the verge of economic collapse since the American Revolution. No, and I don't know any astrologers that old for real, but you understand what I'm saying. It's like, it's one of the things that astrologers predict. However, this time, I think that whether there's financial collapse or not isn't the issue. I think the issue is that we're going to see huge changes in our monetary system. The Bitcoin and cyber currencies, cryptocurrencies, whatever you know or don't know about them today, we're at the tip of a major shift in how we relate to things of value. Taurus, Venus are things of value. Uranus, as it moves through Taurus, is going to really shift the way the banking systems work in relationship to Uranus, technology, instantaneity, the whole, not only Bitcoin, but the whole blockchain technology, which is the technology that's dispersed interactions that are verifiable and have record, that sit beneath the whole idea of cyber currency, is going to change the way we do online interactions. It's going to change the way we relate to one another, maybe as powerfully as the internet in itself has over the past 20 years. It's a big one. So Uranus there. with respect to weather and climate change, that Uranus in Taurus is going to pick up the name of the game, or pick up the intensity of the game. There are other areas, but these are all areas of fundamental, practical stuff. Things that are not about intellectual development, although we may have some of those too. They're things about how we live our life. Now remember, Uranus is technology. In fact, a contemporary of mine, Rick Tarnas, Dr. Richard Tarnas, who wrote the amazing book Cosmos and Psyche, talks about, he wrote a book in which he claims, and he makes a case for the fact that Uranus was misnamed, and that Uranus is actually Prometheus. Prometheus, who stole fire from the gods. And just as a quick aside, there's a wonderful book that came out last year that is one of these worth reading books, and it's called Stealing Fire. And it's based upon the mythology of Prometheus, who basically stole the technology of the gods and gave it to the humans. And the author's claim is this is what's going on now with the intersection of technology, neurophysiology, psychology, entheogenic drugs. All these things are mixing so that we're basically have stolen fire once again from the gods. But the point here is that Uranus is the planet of technology. But unlike Uranus and Aries, the technology now is about, it's about where the rubber meets the road. It's about soma, body. It's about physicality. And I think that, and it will be most important for people who have planets that through this 7-year period will be either conjoined. In other words, if you have a planet in Taurus, whether you're a sun sign or moon sign Taurus, or you have a rising sign of Taurus, or any planet in Taurus, at some point Uranus is going to come across that planet and go, and something is going to come out into awareness and awaken you and open up your life and give you freedom where you didn't know you didn't have it. And I said that exactly correct, where you didn't know you didn't have it. On the other hand, if you have planets in Scorpio, Scorpio is opposite Taurus, and therefore Uranus in Taurus is going to oppose your planets in Scorpio, whether it's your sun sign or moon sign or Mercury or ascendant or any planet. And that's going to then show up, that lightning, that sudden change, that unpredictable awakening may show up through relationship, because oppositions are like a tug of war that are inside, outside, me, you, and there's the relationship aspect. If you have planets or sun sign in Leo or Aquarius, the other two fixed signs, then Uranus moving through Taurus is going to square your sun or moon or whatever your planets are in Leo and or in Aquarius, and that's going to create some internal conflict that requires resolution, because that's how 90-degree angles or squares work. Now, the other side of this is that if you have planets in other earth signs, meaning in Virgo or Capricorn, then Uranus moving through Taurus is going to create harmonious trines, and the changes that you've been trying to make in your life for the past 7 years or 70 years all of a sudden occur with great ease. You almost don't even have to do anything. The changes just happen because trines, the energy flows. And or if you have sextiles, meaning that if you have a planet in Pisces, that's sextile Taurus from one side, or in Cancer, that sextiles it from the other, there can be some support. So this whole idea of Uranus moving through Taurus has the global impact of shaking things up that are status quo, that don't want to be shook up, that are fixed and that are like rock, like stable. That's for everyone. But depending on where you have planets in your chart, depends upon how it impacts you personally. And it's a good thing to know if you're digging into your own astrology and how this works for you. One of the questions will be to ask yourself or your astrologer is, what will Uranus in the next 7 years as it moves through Taurus, what will it do in my chart as compared to what it did in the prior 7 years as it was moving through Aries? All right, you with me here? All right. So that's the big event. That's the chronic. I mean, ultimately, there's two things in March. There's Mercury retrograde and Uranus moving into Taurus. Now, as I said last month, February goes out with a bit of an explosion. Certainly, today on February 27th, we've had Michael Cohen, is that his name? You can tell my brain's full. Testify all day in court to things that anyone who is a Trump supporter will say, well, he's a liar, and everyone else will go, I already knew. You know, it's amazing to me how schizophrenic, and I mean this in a very true sense, this is without, well, I was going to say it's without judgment, it's with judgment, but the judgment is that a neuroses can be cured by communication, you know, and by learning the truth. Schizophrenia is when there's a break that the more you communicate, the greater the break becomes. And that we as a culture, and maybe even planetarily, and this is a deeper issue that after a second glass of wine, I could probably enjoy a conversation for 3 or 4 hours on this, not tonight. But as a culture, we have become schizophrenic. Using Marshall McLuhan's words, we've flipped out. Our internal nervous system is now an exo-nervous system. It's out there in the form of electronic, digital, you know, cloud, whatever it is that's out there, our nervous system is out there. And this whole idea of having, in some ways, H.G. Wells's book, The Time Machine, where in the future there were two different races of humans. There were the Morlocks and the Eloi. And the Morlocks were the, you know, meat and potato mechanics who kept all the machines running underground. And the Eloi were the leftover hippies from the 60s who basically were making love and smoking dope and listening to the Grateful Dead. I did that. Okay. But we've become that. And in some ways, you can watch the exact same testimony, and no amount of communication will change the person's perception of what they think they've heard through that day. Now, regardless of that, and I'm very cleverly avoiding taking a strong political position here, which probably is obvious what mine is, but every month people come out of the woodwork, and I end up having to watch the YouTube channel very carefully and choose which ones to engage and which ones to just delete. Okay, so the deal though is that we are on the, a good Latin word, cusp. Do you know what cusp means? It means edge. It's Latin for edge. We are on the cusp of so many things. We have, this is a chart for March 1st, and we have Venus, which has just moved into Aquarius. We've come off a month or so of a bunch of Capricorn energy. We have a Capricorn backdrop, a chronic case of Capricorn that's going to last until next January, February, March. Because Saturn, every 28 years, comes back around to his home sign of Capricorn, and this time, while Saturn is moving through Capricorn, so is Pluto, and we will have by next year at this time, Saturn will have caught up with Pluto, and we will have that once every 35 year or so Saturn-Pluto conjunction. And I've been interviewed so many times in these past months about what's up for 2019, and the most common question I get is, so what's the most important astrological date in 2019? And my answer is January 11th of 2020. And which stops the interviewer right there. No, I asked for 2019. I go, no, the Saturn-Pluto conjunction in January of 2020 is the most important event in 2019 because everything is leading into that. We have a year of Jupiter expansion, but Saturn on the far end of this is waiting to put that foot down. So it's important that we don't just go, oh, everything's going to be fine. And it's not that everything's going to be terrible, it's just that we have reality to deal with. So we have this, this Capricorn cluster, and Venus has just moved, I was going to say today, but on March 1st, Venus moves from Capricorn into Aquarius, and our antenna go out into the future. But here's the real deal behind this. And that is that because Uranus is getting ready to change signs, Uranus on March 1st is at 29 degrees and 48 minutes of Aries, and it takes it a week to go those last 12 minutes. That's how slow these outer planets move. So as Venus changes signs from Capricorn to Aquarius, it forms a square with Uranus. Then it's Uranus's last, I don't know what the word is, its last thing, its last hurrah in Aries is being squared by Venus. And Venus is about love, and it's about our values. And Venus moving into Aquarius is like a shift into the future. It's instead of loving what's stable, Capricorn, instead of loving what's loyal and what's committed and what's real, Capricorn, Venus moves into Aquarius on March 1st, and we love the future. We love being freed from whatever was holding us back. And so while that happens, Venus is squaring Uranus, which is the planet relating to Aquarius. Every planet relates to a sign, every sign relates to a planet. And so this Venus square Uranus that occurs early in the morning on March 1st, just prior to Venus moving into Aquarius just 4 hours later on the morning of March 1st, is rather intense. Now, the other piece of this is that Chiron, which is a 50-year cycle, and Chiron we don't often talk about in depth, but Chiron is a class of objects that go around the sun. There's a pile of them, and Chiron is called the centaurs. And Chiron cuts in closer than Saturn's orbit and goes out further than Uranus. It's kind of a maverick energy, but it's often called the wounded healer. And Chiron has just changed signs from Pisces into Aries, which means that as Venus moves from Capricorn into Aquarius, as Venus moves from Capricorn into Aquarius, it forms a square with Uranus and a sextile with Chiron, and that sextile with Chiron is a key to March because it gives us the ability to do the healing energy that is necessary to go on. So I want to move this up to March. This is March 1st here. And I want to move this up to March 6th. And I want you to pay attention here. Let's go. There we are, March 1st. There's Venus into Aquarius. We have the moon on March 1st in Capricorn. But I want you to watch over the first few days of March. That moon will move quicker than everything else as it gets closer and closer to the sun. And meanwhile, the sun will move 1 degree every day closer to Neptune. So we're just watching the moon and the sun come toward the new moon at 8:03 a.m. Pacific time on March 6th. So there's one day, that's March 2nd. There's March 3rd, 4th. We're keeping our eye on the moon. There's the 5th. On the 5th, look at Uranus is at 29:59 degrees of Aries. Late on the 5th is when Uranus actually moves into Taurus, actually the very first moment of the 6th here in Seattle, but it's the 5th or 6th depending upon where you are on the planet. So we got now Uranus right on that edge. And look here, we have the moon coming up to the sun, and the sun coming up to Neptune. I'm going to move this an hour at a time for 12 hours to get to about 8 a.m. And right there you can see that the moon is at 15 Pisces, the sun is at 15 Pisces, 1546, that's almost 16, and Neptune is just barely at 1608. So we have a new moon, and we could actually make this exact by putting this at, it's 8:03. Let's just back this up minutes here. There we go. So there is the exact new moon, and the sun and the moon are within less than a half a degree from Neptune. Mercury ain't moving. Mercury is at 29.5 degrees of Pisces. It's just ready to blast into Aries, and Aries is the beginning of everything new. But the guy in charge goes, no, Mercury, you have to slow down and stop. And in fact, it's going to be another month before I let you go into, it's like Moses not being allowed into the promised land. You need to wander around in Pisces, retrograding and stumbling around in your fantasies and dreams, for another month before you get to go into Aries. But you see how it's, again, right on the cusp, it's on the precipice, and it's barely moving because it turns retrograde. It turns retrograde like that day. It's not moving at all. And if we move it just a few, let's just move it a day now ahead, you'll see that Mercury now has turned retrograde officially. But we have this new moon in Pisces. Pisces is the last sign of the zodiac. It's where everything that goes through the garbage disposal of everything. In other words, it's not that it's just garbage, it's everything flows out into the swamp of Pisces where something magical happens because everything is contained there. It's the universal consciousness. It's the swamp that contains every possible beautiful dream and nightmare, and from that swamp, the seed of what happens new in Aries is reborn. And so that moment of Pisces becoming Aries is the manifestation of metaphysical, spirit, soul, into physical incarnation. Aries is Mars, it's the actual physical and going somewhere. The thing is that Pisces is always about dreams and imagination and dissolution of boundaries and compassion and sensitivity and egolessness and all these kinds of things. But Neptune, the planet related to Pisces, spends 14 years in each sign. And Neptune right now is 7-8 years into Pisces. Neptune is halfway through Pisces, and this new moon in Pisces is exactly conjunct Neptune. So you want to talk about a new moon that is tied to dreams and potential and imagination and spirituality and all of this wonderful thing you can. But don't forget, it's also tied to fantasies that are totally delusional. It's also tied to confusion. And I've said from this podium before that confusion is not terrible like the ego thinks it is, because confusion means melting with something else. And if two things, if I'm confused, that means I don't know where my boundaries are, and I don't know where I become you or you become me. And I always think of Neptune's confusion is I am you as you are me as we are all together, goo goo gajoob. It's like there's no ability to know what's real because there's no subject-object differentiation when we're hanging out in Pisces, which is spiritual. But it also makes it difficult to figure out who's getting the better deal before I sign this contract. And Mercury is turning retrograde in Pisces. And Neptune, the planet of delusion, confusion, spirituality, creative imagination is also right lined up with the moon. This is an incredibly potent and powerful new moon, and it's also at a point that is halfway between Saturn and Mars, which is coming into a trine by March 20th. And that Saturn-Mars trine is one of the saving graces of March, because Mars, the planet of going forward, Mars is in Taurus now. Mars has come out of Aries, where it was going forward at breakneck speeds and it didn't even care where it was going. Didn't care if it was going to get there. Mars in Aries just likes to go. I got one of those. When Mars gets into Taurus, it can be really frustrating for Mars because he has to slow down. But the thing is that Mars in Taurus does something that Mars in Aries does not. You know what it is? It gets to where it's going. It may take a while, it may be plodding, it may be determined, it may feel out of place, it may feel even frustrated because it doesn't get to go as fast as it's going to go. But while this Mars is moving through Aries by March 20th, that Mars will get to 18 degrees or almost 19 where Saturn will be, and Mars harmonizes with Saturn, and Saturn in Capricorn is the make it real. So here's the key, or one of the keys for March, and that is, don't forget the dreams that you have the first week of March as you move towards the new moon on March 6th. And Mercury ain't getting to where you want it to get to, and that's okay. Forget about those goals that you set. Instead, allow your mind to sink into those dreams and create visions and really extend them, because then as that Mercury recovers, words are good Mercury retrograde words. Recover, review, revision, rethink, reconsider. These are all Mercury retrograde words. As that Mercury retrogrades through Pisces, you get a chance to redo and revisit those things which you haven't been able to do, but now with that sense of the perfection of the dreams and the imagination, as Mars moves towards its trine with Saturn, Mars, the planet of force, of energy, moving towards Saturn, the planet that makes it real. So we have an opportunity to really turn our dreams into reality. That Saturn trine Mars is exact. I said on the 20th, it's actually exact trine to Saturn on the 14th. I'm going to buzz this ahead so you can see this. On the 14th, Mars is trine to Saturn exactly, but then by the 20th, that Mars is trine Pluto exactly. And so we get this mid-month March intensity and power of having the drive to accomplish what we want to, organize things in a way that's very down to earth and practical. Even though we're still floating up here in Pisces land somewhere, the fact is now Uranus is in Taurus. We're getting this Taurus emphasis of this energy, and we're right here on another cusp, and that cusp is the cusp of the astrological new year. And that actually occurs on the following day, on March 20th, where the sun moves from Pisces into Aries. That is the Spring Equinox. That's one of the important 4 points on the calendar year that mark the seasonal changes. And this is the beginning. This is the new beginning. This particular day is also very interesting because that's the day that we have Mars that is trining Pluto, and the moon on March 20th early in the day is filling out that grand trine, and so we're getting some real stability. And yet if we follow that through an hour at a time, we can see that there it is. The sun moves into Aries at about 2 in the afternoon. The actual time is 2:58 p.m. In the Pacific Northwest, or actually Pacific time zone. And then the moon, which is moving faster than the sun, the moon gets to that last degree of Virgo, and it moves into Libra, and the actual full moon on the 20th, on the day of the equinox, the full moon is at 6:42 p.m. And this again is we have two powerful lunations this month. Normally the lunations, the new moon and full moon, are those acute energies that don't matter. But this month, both of the lunations are intense, because one occurs on the spring equinox, like within a few hours, and the other occurs conjunct or lined up with Neptune. And so we get this sense of not only the dreams becoming real, but the standoff in relationships and the conflict between Venus and Mars. We're seeing this certainly being played out on the political scene, of what maybe began most recently as the hashtag Me Too movement. For those of you who are on my Cosmic Quickies, and some other of you may have seen, I did a couple of these that were devoted to Nancy Pelosi and Donald Trump's astrology and how that interacts, involving the fixed star Algol, which is the beheaded head of Medusa. And this basically is, from the male standpoint, the most terrifying star in the entire zodiac, because when you look into Medusa, you basically freeze, you turn to stone. But that's from a patriarchal point of view. The fact of the matter is that Medusa was this very beautiful virgin priestess in the temple of Athena, and she was perhaps the first mythological She was the first mythological hashtag Me Too victim, because she was raped by Neptune, by Poseidon, which is the Greek version of Neptune. And when Athena came back and saw what had happened, the temple was desecrated, and her virgin priestess had sex with Poseidon and Neptune, and so she punished the victim. She turned Medusa into this horrific, frightful-looking being, and her beautiful hair, of which she was very vain about, was turned into snakes, and so that anyone who looked at her turned to stone. It's a very interesting twist on what we think of the story of Medusa. But it's significant here for a number of reasons, because we have this month, this full moon that occurs at the point of this of the equinox, which means that the sign of Aries, self, and Venus, the not self. Aries is a Mars sign, and the moon in Libra, that's a Venus sign. We have Venus and Mars squaring off in the sky, while Mars is trine harmonizing to Pluto, which really gives us the ability to pull the energy up from very deep places. Pluto is often stuff that's hidden, that's buried, that's subconscious, fears that are stuffed down, stuffed down, kind of come up into the open. And so the month begins with Venus squaring Uranus and some discomfort over the new and where we are and what's our feelings that are out of the box that are not being recognized, and it's rather explosive. But by the end of the month, Venus moves into Pisces, and it forms a sextile with Uranus, and the energy is flowing much easier. And so the energy at the end of the month is such that on March 28th, Mercury, which turned retrograde back on the 5th, Mercury has retrograded all the way back to where Neptune is. Mercury lines up with Neptune, and for 5 days we're pretty much lost in this dream world. And yet then Mercury turns direct on the 28th, and Mercury then takes until April 2nd to get past Neptune. But at this time, we're like in new territory. We're actually moved in new territory, and there's some energy that's pushing us forward. The sun's in Aries. Eventually, Mercury and Venus will catch up and move into Aries. But the month ends with steady, sluggish, determined, don't make me go any faster than I'm going, Mars and Taurus. On the last day of the month, Mars actually moves from Taurus into Gemini, and we're excited, we're enthused, we're ready for what's next. We don't know what's next, but we're ready for it because that Mars in Gemini wants to go everywhere. I think there's an old fire sign theater line that I use to describe Gemini sometimes, Mars in Gemini in particular. It's how can you be two places at once when you're nowhere at all? And so, in a way, we look at this month of March and it's filled with all this high frequency energy, and yet the background is Mercury turning retrograde, all that Piscean energy that builds from the new moon all the way through the full moon into Aries where the energy begins to shift, but that Mercury hanging out with Neptune, in Pisces, and at the same time we have Uranus moving into Taurus, which is a definite shift. We'll come back here next month and we'll explore what's happened and what's going on next month. And I appreciate your indulgence. We got off to a late start. We went a little long, but thank you all and have a great month.